the engineer and the Empress. Marcus Chen had seen some strange things in his 15 years as a maintenance engineer, but nothing quite prepared him for the Xantharian Imperial Station. The entire structure seemed to breathe, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that shifted according to the mood of its inhabitants. The Xantharians themselves were magnificent creatures, standing nearly 8 feet tall with crystalline exoskeletons that refracted light into rainbow patterns. Their multiple limbs moved with precise grace, and their compound eyes missed nothing. Right now, Marcus was elbow-deep in an atmospheric regulator that had apparently been designed by someone who never expected it to need repairs. The Xantharians had mastered interstellar travel, quantum communication, and biological engineering, but they seemed to have missed the day when practical maintenance design was taught. 17 years of service, Marcus muttered to himself, wrestling with a coupling that refused to budge. And still nobody thinks about the poor soul who has to fix this stuff later. The royal wing of the station was off-limits to most personnel, but Marcus had earned special clearance after he fixed a critical life support failure that the Xantharian engineers had deemed impossible to repair. Humans, it turned out, had a knack for improvisation that the logic-focused Xantharians found both baffling and invaluable. He didn't hear her approach. The Xantharians moved almost silently despite their size, their segmented legs finding purchase with barely a whisper. What he did hear was the sound that made him freeze, a high-pitched clicking that set his teeth on edge. Marcus turned slowly. The Empress Valera stood 3 meters away, and even in his limited experience with Xantharian body language, he could tell something was wrong. Her crystalline exoskeleton, normally a brilliant amber that flowed like liquid gold, had developed dark patches along her thorax. Her antennae, those delicate sensory organs that crowned her head, were trembling violently. The clicking sound was coming from her mandibles, which she seemed unable to control. "Your Majesty," Marcus said carefully, setting down his tools. He'd been briefed extensively on protocol. Never approach a Xantharian royal without invitation. Never make sudden movements. Never, under any circumstances, touch them. The Empress tried to speak, but the words came out fragmented, broken by that terrible clicking. "The systems, you must. I require." She took a step forward and her leg buckled slightly. One of her hands shot out to brace against the wall, leaving a small crack in the crystal surface. Marcus's engineering instincts kicked in before his sense of self-preservation could stop him. He'd seen structural failures before, knew the warning signs when something was about to catastrophically break. The Empress was displaying every single one. "Ma'am, you need to sit down," he said, already moving toward her. There was a bench nearby, one of those elegant Xantharian designs that looked like it was grown rather than built. "Let me help you." "No." The word came out sharp, almost panicked. "You cannot. Touch is forbidden, the contamination." But her legs were giving out. Marcus reached her just as she began to collapse, and his hands instinctively went to steady her. His right hand caught her arm, feeling the strange warmth of her crystalline shell. His left hand, reaching for better leverage, brushed against one of her antennae. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Valera's compound eyes went completely dark, pupils dilating in a way Marcus didn't know was possible. Her entire body went rigid for a heartbeat, then every joint seemed to unlock at once. She collapsed against him with a sound that might have been a gasp or might have been something else entirely. Her weight nearly drove him to his knees, but he managed to guide them both down to the bench. "What did you?" Her voice was barely a whisper, stripped of all imperial authority. "What did you do?" Marcus's hand was still resting against her antenna, and he could feel it vibrating under his fingers. Not the violent trembling from before, but something gentler, almost like a purr. You were falling. I'm sorry, I know I'm not supposed to touch you, but you were going to hurt yourself." "Don't stop," she said, so quietly he almost didn't hear it. "What?" "Don't stop touching me." Her voice was stronger now, but there was something desperate underneath it. "Please." Marcus had no idea what he was doing, but he kept his hand where it was, gently supporting her antenna. Up close, he could see it was an incredibly complex organ, covered in tiny sensory hairs that seemed to respond to his touch. He moved his fingers slightly, exploring the structure, and Valera made a sound that was definitely not anything he'd heard from a Xantharian before. "Is this helping?" he asked, genuinely confused. "I don't know." She sounded just as confused as he felt. "I've never felt anything like this. It's as if every nerve in my body just remembered how to function properly." The dark patches on her exoskeleton were fading, he noticed. The crystalline surface was smoothing out, returning to that liquid gold appearance. The clicking from her mandibles had stopped completely. Even her breathing, which he hadn't realized was labored, had steadied into a regular rhythm. "How long have you been having symptoms?" Marcus asked, his engineer's mind already trying to diagnose the problem. Symptoms? She tried to pull back to regain some of her composure, but her body wasn't cooperating. She remained leaning against him, her antenna still under his fingers. The shell discoloration. The tremors. The mandible clicking. "That's not normal, right?" Valera was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone admitting a carefully guarded secret. 43 years. Since the day I ascended to the throne. Marcus's hand stilled. 43 years? You've been dealing with this for 43 years and nobody's helped you. It's called shell lock. A stress condition. The exoskeleton begins to crystallize prematurely, becoming rigid, brittle. Eventually. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. And there's no treatment? There was once. Before we evolved beyond it. Her antenna moved under his hand, almost nuzzling into his palm. 3,000 years ago, Xantharians used tactile communication. Physical contact was how we bonded, how we comforted each other, how we expressed what could not be said in words. But we developed pheromone communication, telepathic links through our antennae. Touch became primitive, unnecessary, then actively discouraged. "But your nervous system still remembers," Marcus said, understanding dawning. "Your body still needs it, but your culture has forbidden it." "The Empress does not need," Valera said, but there was no conviction in her voice. "The Empress is above such primitive requirements. The Empress exists to serve the Empire through logic and perfect clarity, unmarred by the chaos of physical sensation. The Empress," Marcus said gently, "is about to crystallize herself to death because she's trying to be something biology won't allow." The words hung in the air between them. A human maintenance engineer had just told the ruler of the Xantharian Empire that she was doing everything wrong. Marcus waited for the guards to burst in, for his immediate arrest, for his short career to end in a very permanent way. Instead, Valera laughed. It was a strange sound, chittering and musical at the same time, and it shook her whole body. "You have no idea how long I've waited for someone to say that. Someone who wasn't bound by protocol or fear or political ambition. Just simple, honest truth." "I'm good at simple and honest," Marcus admitted. "Terrible at politics. It's why I fix machines instead of dealing with people. And yet here you are, fixing an empress." She finally pulled back, slowly testing her stability. She could stand now, though she seemed reluctant to move too far from him. Her antennae oriented toward him, tracking his movements. "What is your name?" "Marcus Chen, Your Majesty. Maintenance Engineer, 3rd Class, Human Alliance Liaison Division." Marcus Chen. She tested the syllables, her mandibles forming sounds that human names weren't designed for. "You will report to my private chambers. Tomorrow. Sunset cycle. Tell no one." "Ma'am, I don't think." "That is not a request." The Imperial authority was back in her voice, but something had changed. It wasn't the cold command he'd heard in recordings. It was warmer, almost pleading. "I'm offering you a contract. Biomechanical consultation. You will name your price." Marcus looked at her, this magnificent being who ruled billions, who commanded fleets and shaped policy across star systems, and who was desperately asking a simple human engineer for help she couldn't get anywhere else. "I don't want money," he said finally. "But I'll need supplies. Materials. Access to create a proper space. Done. And safety guarantees. I'm guessing there are people who wouldn't be thrilled about a human having private access to the Empress. Anyone who threatens you will answer to me personally." The temperature in the corridor seemed to drop several degrees. "I am still Empress Marcus Chen, and I protect what is mine." The possessiveness in her voice should have been alarming. Instead, Marcus felt something else entirely, a sense that he'd just stepped into something far more complicated than a simple maintenance contract. "Tomorrow at sunset," he agreed. "I'll bring my tools." "Bring yourself. That will be sufficient." She moved past him, her gait steadier now, her exoskeleton gleaming properly for the first time in their encounter. At the corridor's end, she paused and looked back. "Marcus Chen, you have given me something I thought lost forever. I do not know yet whether to thank you or fear what that means. Most days I don't know whether to thank or fear my own decisions either, Your Majesty. I think that just means we're both alive." She left then, disappearing into the bioluminescent glow of the royal corridors. Marcus stood alone, his hands still tingling from contact with her antenna, and wondered what exactly he'd just agreed to. He'd come to the Xantharian Imperial Station to fix atmospheric regulators and calibrate life support systems. Somehow he'd ended up agreeing to repair an empress instead. He looked down at his hands. They were still shaking slightly. Not from fear, though there was plenty of that. From something else. From the memory of how she'd felt under his fingers, alive and desperate and impossibly vulnerable despite her crystalline armor. Well, he told the empty corridor, this is definitely going to complicate things. The atmospheric regulator still needed fixing. But somehow, Marcus suspected that was now the least important problem he'd be dealing with. Tomorrow at sunset, he'd report to the private chambers of an empress who'd been slowly dying from isolation for 43 years. He'd bring his tools, his hands, and his completely inadequate understanding of Xantharian biology. And together, they'd try to fix something that had been broken for far longer than either of them had been alive. The corridor lights pulsed softly, responding to the emotional residue in the air. Even the station seemed to know that something significant had just occurred. Marcus picked up his tools and headed back to his quarters. He had a lot of research to do before tomorrow, and a feeling that his simple life as a maintenance engineer had just become extraordinarily complicated. But as he walked, he couldn't stop thinking about the way her antenna had moved under his hand, or the desperate relief in her voice when she'd asked him not to stop. He'd spent his career fixing broken systems, finding solutions to impossible problems. Maybe an empress wasn't so different from a malfunctioning atmospheric regulator. Both needed someone who could see past the surface complexity to the simple problem underneath. Both just needed someone who cared enough to try. The price of connection. Marcus spent the entire night researching Xantharian biology, or at least trying to. The problem was that most of the medical databases focused on pheromone balance and telepathic network optimization. References to tactile sensitivity were buried in anthropological texts thousands of years old, treated as evolutionary curiosities rather than active biological needs. What he did find was troubling. Shell lock wasn't just a stress condition. It was a progressive neurological disorder caused by sensory deprivation. The Xantharian nervous system, denied physical contact, essentially began to shut down non-essential pathways. The crystalline exoskeleton, normally flexible and self-repairing, would harden and crack. Eventually, the entire body would lock into permanent rigidity. The old texts called it the loneliness death. By the time sunset cycle approached, Marcus had assembled a collection of materials that would have looked suspicious to anyone paying attention. Soft fabrics from the human quarters, heating elements, cushions designed for human furniture, and several portable light sources that produced warm spectrum illumination instead of the cool bioluminescence the Xantharians preferred. The private entrance to the Empress's chambers was exactly where she'd indicated, hidden behind a maintenance panel that looked like every other maintenance panel on the station. Marcus keyed in the access code she'd provided, and the door whispered open. The space beyond was vast and cold. Crystal walls soared upward into shadows, and the floor was polished to mirror brightness. There was almost no furniture, just a few elegant platforms that seemed designed more for display than comfort. The entire chamber felt less like living quarters and more like a museum exhibit. Valera stood at the far end, silhouetted against a viewport that showed the swirling colors of a nearby nebula. She'd removed her ceremonial armor, and her exoskeleton gleamed in its natural state. Without the trappings of office, she looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable. "You came," she said, not turning around. "I gave my word." Marcus set down his bag of supplies. "Your Majesty, I need to ask you something important. When was the last time someone touched you?" "Before yesterday, I mean." 43 years, 2 months, and 17 days. The precision of the answer told him she'd been counting. "The day of my coronation. My predecessor, Empress Talish, placed her hands on my antennae in the traditional blessing. It lasted perhaps 5 seconds. She finally turned to face him. That was the last time anyone touched me with kindness." Marcus felt something twist in his chest. 43 years. And you've been dealing with shell lock symptoms the entire time? The first year was bearable. By year 5, I learned to hide the tremors. By year 10, I had perfected the art of standing perfectly still so no one would notice the rigidity spreading through my joints. Her antennae drooped slightly. By year 20, I stopped counting the days and started counting the reasons to continue. But you did continue. I am Empress. My people need me. My duty is clear. She moved toward him, her gait still carrying traces of the stiffness he'd seen yesterday. But yesterday, for the first time in decades, I remembered what it felt like to exist without pain. Your touch did something the finest medical technology in the Empire could not accomplish. Marcus pulled out his portable scanner, a human device that the Xantharians found primitive but occasionally useful. May I examine you? Properly this time? Valera nodded and moved to one of the platforms. She settled onto it with visible relief, and Marcus noticed how her joints clicked audibly with each movement. Up close, with better lighting, he could see the damage more clearly. Fine cracks ran through her exoskeleton like spider webs. Some segments had darkened to an unhealthy gray-brown. Her antennae, which should have been constantly mobile and expressive, moved sluggishly. "This is worse than I thought," Marcus said quietly. "Your Majesty, I'm not a doctor. I'm an engineer. I fix machines, not people." "Then fix me as you would fix a machine," Valera said. "Diagnose the problem. Identify the solution. Implement the repair." Her compound eyes met his. "I am trusting you with something no one else in the Empire can know. I am dying, Marcus Chen. Slowly, painfully, publicly, but dying nonetheless. And I cannot let anyone see it, because the moment my weakness becomes known, the Empire will tear itself apart." Marcus sat down beside her, close enough to touch but not yet making contact. "Why me? You could have chosen any doctor, any specialist. Because you are not Xantharian. You are not bound by 3,000 years of cultural evolution that says touch is primitive and beneath us. You see me as a problem to be solved, not a symbol to be maintained." She paused. "And because when you touched me yesterday you did not recoil. You did not find me repulsive or strange. You simply helped." "You're not repulsive," Marcus said firmly. "You're magnificent. Your people are magnificent. But this cultural prohibition against touch, it's killing you. Literally." "I know." The admission seemed to cost her something. "But I cannot simply decree that 3 millennia of evolution be reversed. The Empire functions on pheromone communication and telepathic networks. Physical touch disrupts the neural pathways. It introduces chaos into our ordered society. Maybe your society needs a little chaos," Marcus suggested. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his intention, and placed his hand on her forearm. The crystalline surface was warm, almost hot to the touch. He could feel vibrations running through it like electricity through a wire. "May I? Please." He began working systematically, the way he'd approach any complex repair job. Start with the extremities, work toward the core. His hands moved along her arm, feeling for temperature variations, testing flexibility, noting where the crystal had thickened or cracked. Valera remained perfectly still, but he could hear her breathing change, could see the subtle shifts in her bioluminescence. When he reached her shoulder joint, she made a sound, a sharp chittering that made him freeze. "Did I hurt you?" "No." Her voice was strained. "The opposite. I had forgotten that joint could move freely. It has been locked for 12 years. Marcus worked the joint carefully, feeling it resist and then gradually yield. The crystal ground against crystal, making sounds that set his teeth on edge, but slowly, incrementally, the range of motion increased. By the time he finished with both arms, Valera was trembling again, but this time not from shell lock. "This is overwhelming," she whispered. "I don't know how to process so much sensation at once." "We'll take it slow," Marcus promised. "Your nervous system needs time to remember how this works." He moved to her thorax, where the worst of the discoloration had gathered. "This is going to be more intense. Are you ready?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. What followed was the most unusual hour of Marcus's life. He worked across her exoskeleton with methodical care, finding pressure points that released tension, identifying locked segments that needed gentle manipulation, discovering places where simple sustained contact caused the dark crystallization to fade. It was part massage, part physical therapy, and part something else entirely, a kind of communication that had no words. Valera cycled through a dozen different states. Sometimes she was silent, her bioluminescence pulsing in patterns Marcus couldn't interpret. Sometimes she made sounds, chittering and humming and occasionally gasping. Once she grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "Too much?" he asked immediately. "Not enough." Her grip loosened. "I apologize. I am not accustomed to wanting anything this desperately." When he finally moved to her antennae, she actually pulled back. "Marcus, they are the most sensitive organs we possess. The connection point for our telepathic networks. If you touch them incorrectly, you could damage my ability to communicate with my people." "Then guide me," Marcus said simply. "Tell me what you need." She did. Haltingly at first, then with increasing confidence, she directed his hands to specific points along each antenna. The organs were incredibly complex, covered in thousands of sensory hairs that responded to chemical signals, electromagnetic fields, and apparently physical pressure. As he worked, following her instructions, he felt the vibrations intensify. There, she gasped. Right there, that junction point. It has been sending pain signals for 15 years. Marcus applied gentle, sustained pressure and something inside the antenna shifted. Valera's entire body convulsed once, then went completely limp. For a terrifying moment, Marcus thought he'd actually hurt her. Then he heard her breathing, deep and regular, and realized she'd simply surrendered completely to the sensation. I apologize, she said after a long moment, not moving from where she'd collapsed against the platform. That was undignified. That was relief, Marcus corrected. Your body was screaming for help and finally got it. Nothing undignified about that. She sat up slowly, testing her movements. Her joints moved silently now. The dark patches had faded to barely noticeable shadows. Her antennae were upright and mobile, tracking his movements with obvious interest. Even her bioluminescence had changed, shifting from the cold blue-white to a warmer golden tone. This is temporary, isn't it? She asked quietly. The shell lock will return. Without regular intervention? Yes. Marcus met her gaze. Your Majesty, I can help manage the symptoms, but I can't cure the underlying problem. Your body needs physical contact. Not occasionally. Regularly. And probably more than I alone can provide. That is impossible. Why? Because I am Empress. For the first time, real frustration cracked through her controlled demeanor. I cannot simply announce that I require tactile therapy like some primitive creature. I cannot show weakness. I cannot admit need. The Empire depends on my absolute authority, and absolute authority cannot beg to be touched. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and began unpacking his bag. Then we don't announce it. We create a space where you can be something other than Empress. What are you doing? Building you a sanctuary. He pulled out the soft fabrics, the cushions, the warm lights. This chamber is beautiful, Your Majesty, but it's also a cage. Cold, formal, designed for display. You need a place where you can actually rest. Where you can be vulnerable without it being a political statement. There is no such place in the Empire. There is now. Marcus looked around the vast chamber, mentally measuring. There's a maintenance shaft behind that wall, isn't there? I saw it on the schematics. Abandoned service tunnel from when this section was originally constructed. Yes, but it's been sealed for. How did you know that? I'm an engineer. I know buildings. He grinned. Give me 3 days and access to that shaft. I'll build you something the Empire has never seen before. A place where you don't have to be perfect. Where you can just be. Valera stared at him. You're asking me to trust you with my life. I'm asking you to trust me with your comfort. There's a difference. Marcus began repacking his supplies, leaving the soft items with her. Use these while I work. Put them somewhere your staff won't see. Practice being uncomfortable with perfection. I don't understand. That's okay. You will. He moved toward the door, then paused. Your Majesty, one more thing. What I'm going to build for you, it's based on human concepts of comfort. It's going to be warm, soft, probably a little chaotic by Xantharian standards. If you hate it, tell me. This only works if you're honest about what you actually need. I have not been honest about what I need for 43 years, Valera said softly. I'm not certain I remember how. Then we'll figure it out together. Marcus smiled. Same time tomorrow? Tomorrow. And Marcus. She touched her own antenna, the one he'd worked on most extensively. Thank you. For seeing me as someone who could be helped rather than something that needed to be maintained. Marcus left her standing in that cold, perfect chamber, surrounded by the soft fabrics he'd brought. As the door sealed behind him, he allowed himself a moment to process what had just happened. He'd spent an hour performing what amounted to physical therapy on an alien empress, and somehow, it had felt like the most natural thing in the world. The next 3 days were a blur of careful subterfuge. Marcus requisitioned materials through his normal maintenance channels, nothing suspicious individually, but collectively enough to furnish a small living space. He accessed the abandoned service shaft through a maintenance conduit 2 sections away from the royal chambers, bringing supplies in through a route that avoided all security checkpoints. The shaft itself was perfect. Roughly 4 meters by 5, it had once housed environmental controls that had since been relocated. The walls were bare metal, but Marcus covered them with insulating panels he'd borrowed from the human quarters. Over that went soft fabric in warm earth tones. He installed the heating elements, dialing them to a temperature that would feel comfortable to someone used to the chilled Xantharian norm. The lighting came next, warm and adjustable, nothing like the harsh bioluminescence that dominated the rest of the station. The furniture was the challenging part. Syntherian designs were elegant but fundamentally incompatible with relaxation. Marcus built something hybrid, a low platform with human-style cushions that could support Valera's weight and exoskeleton structure while allowing her to actually rest. He added smaller cushions, blankets, and even a few plants from the station's botanical section, carefully chosen for their tolerance of unusual conditions. On the third day he cut through the wall from inside the shaft, creating a concealed entrance directly into Valera's private chambers. The panel could be sealed from either side and looked like part of the original wall structure. Unless someone knew exactly what to look for, it was invisible. That evening he brought Valera to see it. She stood in the entrance for a full minute without speaking, her antennae sweeping the space in what Marcus had learned to recognize as intense observation. The warm light reflected off her exoskeleton in colors he'd never seen before, ambers and golds and even hints of rose. "This is human," she said finally. "That's the idea." Marcus gestured to the cushion platform. "Try it. Actually try it. Don't analyze. Don't judge by Syntherian standards. Just sit and tell me how it feels." She moved to the platform hesitantly as if approaching something dangerous. When she finally settled onto it, her entire posture changed. The cushions yielded and supported in ways Syntherian furniture never did. The warmth surrounded her. The soft light made her exoskeleton glow instead of glare. "It's inefficient," she said, but her voice had gone soft. "It serves no practical purpose beyond comfort. Sometimes comfort is the practical purpose." Marcus sat on a smaller cushion nearby, deliberately positioning himself at her eye level rather than below her. "This is your space, Your Majesty. No guards, no advisors, no empire. Just you. And for a few hours a week, just maintenance." "Maintenance?" she repeated, and something like amusement colored her voice. "Is that what we're calling this? Would you prefer biomechanical consultation? I would prefer honesty." She adjusted her position, clearly trying to find the optimal way to interface with furniture designed for a completely different physiology. "What are we actually doing, Marcus Chin? What is this arrangement we've created?" "Keeping you alive," Marcus said simply. "Everything else is details." She was quiet for a long moment, her antennae moving in slow, contemplative patterns. "My chief medical officer, Tikral, he suspects something. He's noticed the improvement in my condition. Yesterday he asked me directly if I had sought treatment outside official channels." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That I had engaged a consultant for stress management techniques." She made a sound that might have been a laugh. "He did not believe me. Tikral has been monitoring my decline for 20 years. He knows that stress management does not reverse shell lock." "Will he report it?" "No. Tikral's loyalty is to my health, not protocol." Valera shifted again, finally finding a position that seemed to work. "But he will want to meet you. To understand what you're doing. And Marcus, he is brilliant. He will know within minutes that you are providing tactile therapy." "Is that a problem?" "It should be. Touch therapy was abandoned as primitive superstition millennia ago. If word spread that the Empress requires it, that she has become dependent on physical contact like some evolutionary throwback." She trailed off. "There are factions in the court who would use that information to question my fitness to rule." Marcus leaned forward. "So we're clear on the risks. What we're doing is dangerous politically. It might be dangerous for me personally. And you're still asking me to continue." "I am not asking." Valera met his eyes. "I am begging. For the first time in 43 years I do not wake up in pain. I can move without conscious effort. I can think without the constant noise of distress signals from my own body. You have given me something I thought lost forever." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "You have given me hope that I might survive this position." The weight of that admission settled between them. Marcus had known intellectually that shell lock was progressive and fatal, but hearing Valera speak so plainly about her own death made it real in a way the medical texts hadn't. "Then we continue," he said firmly. "And if your medical officer wants to meet me, I'll meet him. If he's really concerned about your health, maybe he'll be an ally instead of a threat. You have remarkable faith in the goodness of others. I have remarkable faith in people who genuinely care about their work." Marcus gestured to the space around them. "This is your sanctuary. No politics, no performance. For these few hours you're not the Empress. You're just Valera, and all you have to do is exist." She tested the name silently as if she hadn't heard it in years. Then, slowly, she began to relax into the cushions, letting them support her weight in ways that clearly felt alien but not unpleasant. Her exoskeleton caught the warm light and threw back colors that made the small space feel alive. "Tell me about Earth," she said suddenly. Your world. What is it like? Marcus settled into his own cushion, surprised by the question. Messy. Beautiful. Chaotic in the best possible way. He described oceans and mountains, forests and deserts, the incredible diversity of life that covered every available surface. He talked about cities where millions of humans lived in close proximity, touching each other constantly, unconsciously, as naturally as breathing. Valera listened with an intensity that was almost physical. Her antennae oriented toward him, tracking his every word and gesture. When he described human families, how they held each other in grief and joy, how touch was the first language every human learned, her bioluminescence pulsed with something that looked like longing. That kind of connection, she said when he finished. That casual intimacy. We lost that before we had history to record its loss. Sometimes I wonder what we traded for our logic and clarity. What price we paid to become what we are. Maybe you don't have to keep paying it, Marcus suggested. Maybe there's a way forward that includes both. Logic and touch. Clarity and connection. If I tried to implement that kind of change, I would face resistance from every traditional faction in the Empire. Then start small. Start here. He gestured to the sanctuary around them. Prove it works. Show that you can be both Empress and Valera, both logical ruler and living being who has needs. Then, when you're strong enough, when shell lock is managed and not actively killing you, maybe you can start asking whether the Empire itself might benefit from remembering what was lost. She studied him with those compound eyes that saw in spectrums he couldn't imagine. You are proposing nothing less than cultural revolution. I'm proposing that you survive long enough to have the option of anything. Marcus stood and moved to sit beside her on the platform, close but not touching. For now, let's focus on keeping you alive. Everything else can wait. Valera was silent for a long moment. Then, hesitantly, she leaned against him. Just slightly, just enough that their bodies made contact. Through the crystalline shell, he could feel her warmth, could sense the vibrations that seemed to be her version of a heartbeat. This feels dangerous, she whispered. Probably is, Marcus agreed. I should stop. Probably should. Neither of them moved. They stayed like that as the station cycled through its artificial night, two beings from different worlds finding something unexpected in the space between. Outside, the Empire continued its perfect, logical operations. Inside the hidden sanctuary, an Empress remembered what it felt like to not be alone. And Marcus Chin, maintenance engineer and accidental revolutionary, wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into. Because he recognized the feeling growing in his chest, the one that made him want to build not just spaces but futures, the one that made him think about staying on this station long after his contract ended. He was in trouble. Deep trouble. The kind that didn't have engineering solutions. But as Valera's breathing slowed and deepened against his shoulder, as her bioluminescence dimmed to the soft glow of genuine rest, Marcus decided that some kinds of trouble were worth it. The future could wait. For now there was only this: warmth, connection, and the quiet miracle of someone finally finding the rest they'd been denied for far too long.